Hello. Hello and welcome. I'm just slow walking here for a moment to allow all of our attendees to join. Make sure that everyone catches everything. But I do not want to wait too long as we have a lot to discuss. So hello and welcome to another online presentation from Biometric Update. I'm your host and the managing editor of Biometric Update, Chris Burt. We discuss the hot topics and trending issues in biometrics and digital identity. And today we're going to discuss deepfakes, but in a little bit of a different way than we have in recent presentations. The premise that we're working from today is that you think you know your customers until you don't. This is the deepfakes edition. Deepfakes are, as I'm sure you're all aware, no longer a future risk or a hypothetical threat that's just discussed in white papers. They are currently being used to create synthetic identities that pass traditional KYC checks quietly, repeatedly, and at scale. Most institutions are investing, in many cases quite heavily, in improving future onboarding controls, yet very few have paused to ask a far more uncomfortable question. How many deepfakes were approved before we knew what to look for? This is a topic that Shufti has brought to us today and has contributed to the discussion. Tom Gadsden, VP of Product with Shufti. Thank you for joining us today, Tom.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here. It's an exciting topic. Thank you.
Absolutely an exciting topic. And Shufti's brought with him some friends. So I would also like to introduce at this point Guy Terengi, Sales Director at Acuity Tech. Hello, Guy. How are you today?
Hello, all good here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. We also have with us Shiraz Tariq, research scientist and deepfake and Gen AI forensics expert with CSIRO. Hello, Shiraz. How are you?
Yeah, good, good.
Fantastic. And we also have with us Chris Algrove, director and co-founder of Ingenium Biometric Laboratories. How are you today, Chris?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. So we've got an expert panel today, and Shufti is, of course, known to biometric update readers as a global leader in identity verification and fraud prevention, streamlining the entire KYC and AML lifecycle into one unified platform. Shufti combines advanced facial biometrics and deepfake detection with seamless eIDV and video ident to empower organizations to onboard customers securely and stay ahead of evolving global regulations. Shufti is set apart by its proprietary technology stack, which does not rely on third-party chains, ensures true data sovereignty and high-performance security through flexible cloud or on-premise deployments. Whether navigating complexities of non-Latin scripts in APAC or meeting rigorous standards in MENA and LATAM regions, Shufti delivers industry-leading accuracy and reliability where others struggle. Before we get right into the conversation, I'd just like to quickly let everyone know that we are recording today's discussion. And we will also plan to take a few questions from those of you watching live at the end of our presentation today. Please use the Zoom Q&A function, which you'll find towards the bottom of your screen, perhaps under More. And everyone who has registered will also receive an email at the end with a link to a recording of the event, as well as a link to connect with Shufti to learn more about what they can do to help protect your organization against fraud. So with all that preamble taken care of, I'd like to start, Tom, by asking you, businesses know that they have to put customers through KYC and AML checks, of course, as they open accounts to ensure that they comply with regulations and have, some fraud prevention at that point. And presumably every account that your organization or that any organization has on the books has been through some kind of check. So what is the problem that leaves us with that's going to be the topic of the focus of our conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I think the days where we had clients coming to us and sort of saying kind of mea culpa, I'm not doing KYC checks, this is a risk, help me out, are kind of largely behind us, right? There's sometimes regulatory changes that bring things into place, but that market is largely solved. The thing that has changed, right, is honestly a fundamental market movement from solution providers that could provide like a great happy path journey that got people onboarded to actually the much more complex world that we're in now with deepfakes, sophisticated fraud, and perhaps even sophisticated fraud tools in the hands of many a multitude of amateurs. So the problem is this, right? Like if there is a weakened door, then many people and fraudsters and identities can pour through that. You might well see that instantly. So there's the whole no intent to pay type outcome where you issue a loan and that first payment doesn't come in. So that is very rarely a credit event. That's a fraud, and it's challenging sometimes for credit institutions to see that. But that's a growing view that first party, third party fraud has caught up with you. But also those IDs may persist, and that actually can be much more harmful over long term. So they may sit there for money muling, they're building credit, so it's not a £500 loss, it's a 50,000 or £500,000 loss. And then those explosive losses that can cause huge impact on the businesses and the people running those businesses. Turning that round, though, you also have the MLRO, and that causes them regulatory issues. So slightly tangentially, we had a deep discussion with a prospect recently where actually weak OCR. So this wasn't a fraud piece, but an OCR piece. But that meant that when the regulator came in, they scrutinized the customers they held in their books, and they couldn't they couldn't prove that that person was who they thought they were. And that put them into an enforcement action. So regulators prove deeply, really. So lip service to controls, we do KYC, is often probed. And if you find that there are weaknesses, that document is a deep fake, it's a pass, it's been edited, well, that can really upset the whole piece. And it doesn't come into 5 cases, it comes into the 100% of the cases. So really, I think we all know that deepfakes are here. They're shocking, really, in what we've seen with Nano Banana. And that puts, pressure on these organizations that mean that those KYC checks that you may have done need to be tested. They need to be at a standard. Otherwise, you have this persistent issue.
A persistent and expensive sounding issue indeed. So Guy, I'd like to bring you in at this point. Let's set a baseline because my understanding is that we're not really, what Tom's talking about is not really what happens just when you have terrible IDV technology, right? It's not necessarily, as he just pointed out, a lip service kind of issue. The problem is much more serious and far-reaching than that. So in your experience, what are the kind of risk signals that need to be considered, not just in terms of defenses against the newest deepfake attacks, but for overall fraud defense?
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for the question. Yeah, actually, by using the correct document ID provider with liveness and so on and so forth, this is just one part of, I would say, one piece of the puzzle. It's just one part of the whole, I would say, shield that any company, either it's regulated or non-regulated, needs to be. And some of this endpoints that these companies they use the most, apart from once again document verification, liveness, and so on, I would, based on our experience and what we offer as well, as we are highly focused on the higher risk market, these guys they tend to use geolocation, IP device fingerprint ID verification as well. Plus, they also like to combine all of this, I would say, almost mandatory or very common features with other more plus, I would say, advanced features by setting the correct triggers. I'll give an example. Instead of only using as a level 1 security layer of identify a specific player or a specific user, they also like to combine this, we call it users factors, users data, users information with everything that comes after that, meaning his behavior. So let's say that, yes, I'm an okay player, or I'm an approved person, I was a user that was accepted. However, the way that I've been behaving seems a little bit awkward, seems a little bit strange. The way that I that I'm making some transactions, the way that I'm also even making my interactions within the customer's platform sounds a little bit strange. Then by combining this we call it static information, meaning my personal information plus with this information that it's in progress. That's the beauty of this process when we combine these both parts. So we can the some of the behavior that we see is combining this static information with everything that comes after that. Where is this person now said that he was located? Where is this person located now? He said that he had, let's say, a salary of monetary power of $10,000, but now the way that he's playing, or the amount of money that he's putting in the platform, it's way above that. So there's something awkward happening here. So once again, we are able to combine all of this. We call it KYC endpoints with transaction monitoring, with this KYT endpoints as well.
Very good. So there's a move beyond the initial point check to a more continuous kind of process. And I just want to bring in Chris just for a second here to maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that balance between an initial check and how you achieve that kind of ongoing assurance.
So sure. So there's multiple things to unpick really from what Guy was building very much on. We have the data, we have the initial checks, we may have it's like a gatekeeper type function where you're initially engaging with your customer and you need to gain an assurance that they are who they say they are, they're a real person, it's genuine transaction, their identity evidence that they're producing is legitimate, for example. And then there's throughout that transaction, you then would very much like to be able to make sure that it's the same person who's still engaging, there's no takeover of the account. And then there's beyond that with the ongoing relationship even. So there's multi dimensions of how you engage with your customer, the different type of checks and balances you need to have at each of those stages. So having complementary information such as Guy describes, checking for the fundamental states. Obviously, the key thing we're here today to talk about is the threat posed by deepfakes and having both an ongoing evaluation of your interaction with your person, understanding and assuring those transactions with legacy stuff. So having the ability it's like a whole temporal relationship that you have, and there's a bunch of different things that you can do, particularly around deepfakes. There are emerging detection methods. There's ways in which people can now understand or form a view of a particular transaction, the level of risk that you have, and specifically around deepfakes. So is the data that's being presented to me either the biometric information or the identity document, the identity evidence that the biometric is looking to bind you to? How can we assure that? There are methods, products. Increasingly, the industry is being able to provide some assurance around that level of transaction, which then links through to the stuff that Guy was talking about, where there's a load of other signals, and having multi-dimensional, having different types of information is really, really useful. Within the context of deepfakes, there's different ways in which you can tackle the system. There's different types of security monitoring, checking and validating the legitimacy of a particular set of data that's been presented, whether it's a biometric characteristic or the document, the identity document that's been presented in supporting evidence.
Very good. So really, we're setting up a situation or a scenario in which organizations need to have this comprehensive sort of view throughout the life cycle of the threat of deepfakes, rather than a point in time check. Before we delve further into those emerging detection methods that Chris just referred to, I'd like to bring in Shiraz at this point to explain a little bit more about um, what we mean when we talk about deep fakes and records that may have seemed valid or reliable a few months ago, and now we're discovering are in fact fake and represent a fraud risk. What is that deep fake problem, in the real world today, Shiraz, in terms of, that, as Chris just referred to, breadth of threats that could involve the biometric that is associated with an identity or matched against an identity document. It could be the document itself. It could be something else. So, what are we looking at here in terms of the current threat from deepfakes?
Yeah. I think just to get some perspective, if we zoom out a bit, uh, so deepfakes had kind of like three big jumps of innovation over the last, let's say, 10 years.
Hmm.
And then there's the current wave of deepfakes, which is happening right now. So what I usually call like pre-deepfake, it was mostly like clever graphics. It was happening around or before 2016, 17, and what's happening, and people will do some Photoshop or things to manipulate the data and present it. And then what I call is the origin movement of deepfake, which was around 2015, 2016, or around 17. Then when actually one of some of the researchers tried to build this tool called made this tool called face to face, which was a real-time face and reenactment. And what it did is like it used RGB images from the webcam and was able to transfer expression from a source driving video to a target face. And it was the first visceral scenario where it was like, this is live movement for deepfakes. And then people, and it went from there, white matter, that movement matter is because from there, 1 year later, we saw the deepfake term started to pop up in Reddit, and public tool started to come out on GitHub and some other dark web website as well. So it's kind of, we can say that's the point when we have the creation escape from the lab kind of movement, and the race began and how good it could be, and even if we could tell if it's real or not. And then it moved from there to more scale, realism, and we saw some first detectors being built. The research community started to build some benchmarks. Facebook jumped in with that $1 million challenge for defect detection in 2020, which shows like most of the detector built before that time, even though they were showing good performance, they didn't do well when the domain shift happened. So all those things were happening around 2020, and that's the first jump, I think, but with the defect that happened. And the second one was like people started to look at multi-view avatar, physical plausibility, 3D aware GANs, all those things happening, so that we move from like more static kind of images so to place where people can move the head and still it doesn't distort the deepfake image, so it is becoming more realistic. And it connects later on how it's now going to impact KYC. But so what we were seeing around 2023 is that we move into this 3D area, but not using the 3D rig actually, but it's just the models which were actually trying to build this 3D representation of the human face. Uh, and lastly, it was up until that time, it was mostly face and audio being trying to or being manipulated or uh, used. But from the last jump, which is the current one, I think is the Gen AI wave, where we see diffusion models, multimodal identity, puppeteering, and so all these new methods come from with the obviously with the help of vision language model and diffusion models. And this is where we saw not just face and audio things, but also in connection with documents and other sort of forgery started to come, and like totally fake documents, totally fake identities, a lot of even codes and things, anything which can relate to make things look more plausible and real, started to happen because of these models. And so from there, we were seeing is like deepfake is no longer shown to the camera, which was like the old stuff, but now it's like they are injected as the camera. And this is the difference from the presentation attack to the injection attack. And as modern KYC like flow, we need to have both of these defense for both of them, but also device attestation, because our adversary is in the software upstream of the sensor now, rather than just showing it from behind some kind of device. And how it connects now to the authenticity of current where we stand is. Uh, Again, yeah, I agree with Chris about the documents, authentication, all those things happening uh, at at the level where we can use it for good and bad both, but mostly it's being used for bad in a way that we build these synthetic identities, either it's passport or identity documents or LinkedIn or Facebook profiles. And even not just that, to make it more plausible, we can go date back it to the images. I can make an image of myself in the 90s to make it look more realistic, which makes the person, humans especially, think that, oh, maybe it's from the old, maybe vintage images, so it must be real. So that kind of things are also coming into play with all that. So yeah, I think that's current state of the art where I see the problem going. And lastly, is move from just image or just audio to more multimodal
Mhm.
aspects, and so it's combination of multiple modalities.
Absolutely. And I want to turn back to Chris in just a moment to talk about what he's seeing in testing and consulting. But Shiraz, what you've described there, I think really sets the scene well in terms of when you talked about the evolution to incorporate movement, right? We can see there how for a lot of organizations that, maybe a few years back thought that, well, adding a challenge, right, a movement challenge, a simple liveness detection method that makes it an active liveness detection solution or a presentation attack detection solution rather than a passive one, might have seemed those few years back, without the benefit of hindsight that we have now, to be perfectly adequate in stopping deepfakes. But as you just described, not actually so over time, right?
Yeah, that's the part of question I think I've missed that to answer that if you just had those checks, but and you were thinking, oh, if someone is moving their heads and maybe standing up or putting their hand like this, these are some of the checks people are using. But uh, those checks are can be bypassed, like I think 2 3 years ago or more
Mhm.
already. So but people were using those as actually solutions. So easily some of that data could have sift through the checks into your databases or into some of the legitimate looking data, but it's not. Yeah.
It's a challenging situation for for a business that puts something in place and probably sees some sort of result right away. Oh, look, this is fake. We caught it. It's successful. But then over time, maybe 6 months later, as the models change, you may still catch the worst or the weakest attempts, but those stronger ones are going to get through. And then, as Shiraz just pointed out, this extends straight through to the documents, which we've seen in recent testing by DHS S&T, for instance, has shown that document fraud has become more sophisticated than some legacy solutions are able to handle, right? So we can really see how the evolution has created this problem. So, Chris, what are you seeing in terms of the testing and consulting that you do? What are organizations telling you about how how they're finding this threat in their records and how they're dealing with it?
So, interesting question. Very varied responses from the type of
Sure.
work we do. There's a range of different types of evaluations we perform. They're kind of variations on a theme. So Charles very nicely showed how the move from a presentation attack, where even if you've got a really sophisticated deep fake that you're presenting, if it's on a screen, um, fundamentally any self-respecting presentation attack detection system should say that's a screen. I'm not going to accept it as a legitimate transaction. So it's a move from that type of presentation attack being the prime delivery mechanism, the main attack vector against these type of systems, to an injection attack where rather than targeting the sensor, we're after the sensor. And it's not just a simple camera injection. We need to be concerned about a range of different types of exploits attacking the host operating system, the app that's running itself, the browser, it might be a browser-based app, and also the network communication. So there's a bunch of areas in which people will be attacking these systems. Different types of attack, but what we're really concerned about, certainly from the perspective of the type of work that we do, the type of testing that we do, is exploiting the biometric data in some way. So it's an injection attack that is replacing a legitimate transaction, perhaps with our injected deepfake. We're increasingly seeing them maturing is quite a good way to describe it, probably capability to detect these things. So most pad systems can detect most presentation attacks. We still find gaps that are usually quite interesting. So by no means am I saying pad is a solved problem. Increasingly, though, the focus, quite rightly, is on injection attack detection, and there are methods, there are components in a security architecture. There's injection attack detection subsystems that sit alongside pad subsystems. They often interact with each other. So if you're injecting a deep fake, that deep fake has to fool any pad functionality that sits within the security architecture. And often that type of broader pad subsystem will be quite effective at picking up an injection attack. Not always, and you can modify, you can tweak, you can evolve your deepfake so that actually it meets the requirements for a particular solution, and then you've broken it. And that's really important because, and again, the comparison with the presentation attack threat landscape, injection attacks by comparison to presentation attacks, exceptionally scalable. So if I was to attack Chris with a presentation attack, I'd need to get this biometric characteristic. I may need lots of biometric data to create a high quality mask. I can spend a number of days making it. It may work. It may be hyper realistic, scarily accurate representation of Chris's face features. I then move on to Tom, and I've got to restart that whole process. And it's another week. I've then also got to access their phone or their biometric sensor. If I'm doing an injection attack with my deepfake as the payload, I can make the deepfake. That's cloud computing time. I may have a desktop with a big fat graphic GPU, which means I can do that reasonably effectively. And there are models that can make at least a moderate to good representation of an individual based on a small number of images, possibly even one. I then send a million emails and get 100 hits. So 100 people click on a link, and I can download my malware delivery mechanism to deliver the attack. Now I've just done 100 attacks for relatively little effort, time, and expense. So Guy mentioned there's sort of attacks as a service emerging where you don't have to have, or it might have been Tom, well, Tom or Guy mentioned it. Where you don't have to have the skills and technology, it's being delivered as a package that you can implement. And so the scale and magnitude of these attacks that can be delivered is very significant and represents a huge change in the whole threat landscape. So rather than being fairly narrowed, fairly contained, a lot of the issues around presentation attacks used to be reputational. So even though it's not a viable large-scale attack, if a system is shown to be susceptible to it, there's a reputational damage being caused, whether it's a financial service or a bank or a government system that's being targeted. Now, the scale and scope of the attack includes all the reputational stuff, but more importantly, this is a viable attack that can be delivered at scale and is very challenging to be able to detect. That's even before we get into all the legacy side of things where previous enrollments, existing accounts may have been compromised by an earlier version of the attack. But I don't want to be just too negative. There are, as I say, injection attack detection subsystems. I would categorize it as a maturing security feature. Some are very good. So the testing that we do, some products will hammer at them for 20 or 30 days collective effort on our team's part, and we don't get through. Some are less secure, and it's a very broad mix. The range, the attack points are more varied compared to presentation attacks. So it can be a camera injection, can be simply running an emulator. It can be delivering a hardware, software, virtual camera. It can be targeting an exploit within the host operating system. So the library file, the camera library functions for the operating system. So there's a bunch of things you can attack there, and then post processing with the app, we can even have some networking based attacks. So there's a bunch of different attack points that we need to worry about and we evaluate against. And it's very important that all of these are considered. So you have a range of ways in which you evaluate the security of the system rather than just saying, we'll just do camera injections or limit ourselves, because it's a broad and deep attack space that we need to worry about now. And we see, as I say, a range of different levels of maturity. The early adopters, both from a biometric vendor and a service perspective, the organizations who understand the challenges and the importance and the seriousness of this threat tend to be proactive, and it's not a conformance issue for them. And again, that's a very important point to make. So when we engage with vendors or services, particularly vendors, they tend to either be, I don't care about evaluating my system, I'm never going to do it. I will evaluate, I will test my system, but it's because I'm forced to conform to a particular requirement, whether it's a procurement, whether it's a service, or whether it's some sort of government requirement. And then you have those who recognize the threat, often will have innovation, will often have a solution that has a particular level of security, or the vendor thinks it has, and they want to be able to demonstrate how well it works. So there's three different types of organization that we typically encounter. Even the conformant one, by testing, they gain assurance around their system. The other point, just to finish answering your question, PAD used to be like, for some testing, it's a one shot. You do a PAD evaluation, you get your certificate. Hey, I've got 0% error at level 2. Brilliant. And that certificate dates from 2020 or 2021 or 2018, heaven forbid. And it's never updated. And it's never changed. The product has evolved beyond all recognition, but it's purely, this is a middle group who are interested in conformance. They have a shiny certificate. That's all good, particularly for deep fakes. And it very much touches on the theme today with the legacy side. It's having an ongoing assurance, keeping up to date on the evolution of existing attack vectors, new attack vectors. So one of our partners who we do a lot of work around deepfakes with, they said they had 17 new deepfake algorithms in the last 12 months. Might be new, completely new, or variations on a theme, updated versions, but those all need to be catered for. And where you have your injection attack detection systems, you get 17 new attacks on that. You need to make sure it's resilient. You need to work with your customer, whether it's a vendor, a service, the deepfake detection service provider, to make sure it's all kept up to date and it's evaluated. And it's evaluated in a way that demonstrates both the conformance, because it is important to conform to standards and the requirements for a particular service, but also properly demonstrates the security of your system. And being able to fix issues, like the record we've had for evaluating the system was about 20 minutes, and when we first started testing, we'd broken it. But we worked with that customer and we helped them understand the nature of the problem. They fixed it and they have a more secure system. And that's the bottom line is testing and evaluation is all about improving the security of a particular product, the wider industry, and the service, the industry that service is part of, having more confidence or maintaining the confidence in their data and their customers and their systems.
So really important to keep in mind there that varied performance that Chris alludes to, right? And the ability of a detection system to generalize, right? If you can block one kind of deep fake or a deep fake that's created by a certain model, you may feel that that contributes to conformance and provides a certain degree of security. But if you've got another type of deepfake that's getting through, then due to the scale issue that Chris just described, when you look back at the records that you have and that you've passed, you may find that you're not discovering one deepfake has gotten through and is lying in wait to commit fraud within your system. It could be very many systems. So we've touched, Chris just touched a little bit on the kind of technologies that are available to help protect organizations. But Tom, maybe we can talk a little bit more about some of the positive insights that you've brought today. Deepfake detection is available. Some of the systems, as Chris just described, are quite effective. So how can organizations deploy those protections to address threats that snuck in before they had that kind of capability in place?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. So I think this is really important, right? That organizations work on controls, right? I've worked at Experian, had a really great baked out risk structure, had good controls in place, and like many regulated financial institutions, that culture ran deep. So, in a world where we see, explosive growth in number, depth, sophistication of deepfakes, well, actually, it makes sense to then work out how you implement a control to understand, do I have a problem? Because trying to measure that on fraud rates or anecdotal evidence is not a good way to behave, particularly when there are more automated ways. So, really proud here at Shufti that we're introducing our blind spot audit capability. So, many organizations within the regulator space do retain biometric and customer data for AML purposes. Certainly here in the UK, required to do that for the length of the customer relationship and beyond. And indeed, actually, periodic rescreens are being enforced. So it kind of means there is access to that data. But if you go to your own provider and ask them to mark their own homework, well, you're probably going to get a result, and that's a weakening of the control, right? If you are doubling down on the person who did the check first. So our blind spot audit is hosted on AWS, so it allows robust batch auditing of data and allows sunlight to hit areas that it normally doesn't and implement that control. So the solution is available there on AWS. Customers can therefore, or people can therefore access it. And the kind of great thing really just from an ease of use perspective is you're not sending data necessarily out of your control. If your data is already on AWS, well, you can deploy it within your own infrastructure. So if you're a leader in fraud or a leader in MLRO, that really helps, we think, reduce the barriers to adoption of this, because you're not looking for security assessments in quite the same way as onboarding a new vendor. You can go ahead, test this control, learn, understand where you've got risk before you take that kind of message up the chain. And kind of stepping back a little bit, I think it is worth setting the context here a bit that Chris is absolutely right. The depth of injection attack defenses has really improved, and we see a number of vendors not just add those defenses, but actually really pivot quite hard to those. And we can see that because most vendors like promote and recommend their SDK capture. We certainly do at Shufti. You get better results with our SDK. But for certain use cases or certain clients, they want to use an API. Reasons are many and varied, but sometimes we and others get kind of flat images. And we can see, honestly, that we go and test compliant competitor solutions. I'm sure others do the same for us. And we can see that you can drive maybe not a bus, but like a Fiat 500 at least through a number of our competitor solutions. But realistically, they are not necessarily being breached at great scale because other defenses are in there. But it introduces a risk, right? Like we all talk about deep layered defenses, but actually it can sometimes turn out that there's one reasonably high fence today in the injections, and after that it gets really quite thin. So we're kind of proud of what we do at Shifty in truly adding layered defenses, but also now adding these tools to help customers get a grip and understand their risk position.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and Shiraz, Tom just raised the issue of of how an organization can make choices, right? How do you choose a deepfake detection provider? How do you choose the right kind of protection for your organization? There is all this, increasing competition, as Tom just referred to. We're writing about it every other day in Biometric Update. Somebody's got a new solution or an improvement to an existing solution that they have to add, whether it's injection attack detection capabilities or something more specific to the deepfake content itself. So Shiraz, based on your cybersecurity and deepfake expertise, what would you tell an organization in terms of maybe, a point or two to help them differentiate between these solutions, or a question or two that they can ask vendors as they're making that selection?
Right. Yeah, I think so. I'll try to answer from like a tech point of view and as well as a human-centric kind of point of view as well, because I work on human-centric cybersecurity, so that's kind of like my research area as well. So from a someone as a user of a tool, what they want to should ask definitely is uh, because you don't want something too generic as a tool. So you want to see how your organization specific workflows and SOPs and use cases have been handled in that through that tool. So you have to have that conversation with the vendor. I think it's important. Uh, Also, you have to see what are the main modalities that you have in your workflows, either audio, video, documents, images, and then you have to see what's the capability of those model against those modalities. I think it's good to actually measure that before making a choice. Uh, and then from the vendor side, I think you also have to, I think there is some sort of awareness have to be developed with the users of the tool as well. Or for example, it's a shifting landscape. So what I feel is uh, the user also have to understand that it's just like anti-malware or antivirus tools. These tools have to be updated so that they can capture the new attack vectors, and then they can become better with time. So it won't be 100% accurate all the time. So that has to be understand to understand from the user's perspective as well. But at the same time, when the new, let's say, new fingerprinting or signature has been done for a new type of deepfake, they have to do the tools are it's it's important that the tool do this retrospective search of the whole database, because if something has passed through in the past, it should be able to now detect it based on some new, because some of the generation methods we get to know like in 1 year, like you said, there's 18 19 methods come out, right? But there are some which are like some variations of these popular methods which no one knows, and they just go silently through all these detection tools. So that those are important, and once we find them, it's important to do this retrospective search. And just at the end, to give kind of like a future, what the future should be. Uh, I'll give one example. So what we are seeing now is that many people are looking at frontier AI tools as well for these detection to develop the detection capabilities. There is, but in our experiments, in our research, what we have found is it is relatively very easy to find triggers in those tools, which can make them misclassify. One of the experiments I was just discussed a little bit earlier is the retro style images or the vintage images. So many of these frontier models, if I just put a timestamp, for example, in the image, and I put it like say 2010, 2020 or 2010, it will say, oh, yeah, there is a timestamp. It is from the past, so it's real. If I put VHS like filter on the image, it will say, oh, it is from the 80s or 90s. It's real. So those are some triggers we find, for example, with some of the even we were trying some of the VLMs, the vision language models like GPT ones, and Gemini has it and Grok has it. So we even tried with them, and these some of the triggers were actually impacting and easily bypassing them, even though those models are not fine-tuned for that problem. But even there, we can see those trigger happening. So the future should be like multi-stage defense, but also at each stage of the defense, there have to be multiple detectors. Because if there is one trigger that is triggering one model, hopefully, if we have multiple models in that stage, it should be able to uh, it should be able to be detected by one of those models, even if it bypasses some of them. So I think that's where the future direction should be going as well. Yeah.
Makes sense if those, even the best technology is not going to be 100% effective at stopping, not just all attacks yesterday and today, but tomorrow, then as you say, Shiraz, you need to have multiple checks at multiple stages. That seems like sound advice. Um, so uh, we let's imagining that I've got an iGaming site, and I've gone ahead and had my database audited and found that lo and behold, I do have some fraudulent records that I've previously approved. What would your guidance be in terms of what you do with those results? As an organization, what are the next steps?
Good question, Chris. Building on Sharon's comments, actually. So I'll give you, prior to answering your question, let me just bring you a few numbers. So here in Brazil, we have an average of at least last year of 1 million cell phones that were stolen. So 1 million cell phones, it's rough around 3,000 per day. Reason behind is because all of these guys who are stealing our cell phones, they are not only they want just way more than the cell phone. What they want is the access of fintech, bank accounts, and so on and so forth. Because we are not here in Brazil, we are not so good. We are not good only at soccer, but we are also very good at being creative when it comes to, making new ways of using many types of deepfakes. And this is we say that Brazil for this cybersecurity issues is a lab, is a laboratory for developing solutions like that. So this is the current scenario. However, there is a solution for that, and the solution for that, of course, it will never be fully accurate, 100% accurate. But this is something that it's been helpful for both companies and people is to go further, to go beyond the initial verification, which was what I had said at the beginning and what Sharas also mentioned now. Which endpoints, which are the other parameters that you are also analyzing when this player or this person, this user, they start using your solution, your platform, or your bank account, or whatever the solution that you offer. So back to the old days, the only even per law, The only thing that these companies needed to verify was a document liveness, maybe cell phone, email, some AML watch list, UN, OFAC, and that's it, right?
Mhm.
I'm not saying this is not important. Of course, it is still mandatory, and we are partnering with Shufti for these purposes as well. So we're not saying that it's not mandatory. However, as I was saying, once going back to my previous example, once this guy, the stealer, has got access, technological access to your stolen cell phone, then his next step is to get into your Apple account, is to get your bank account, and so on. So, what are the other parameters that you combine with this previous static information, everything that comes after that? As I said, maybe it can be behavior monitoring. Maybe this guy is using a VPN, or maybe this guy is using another technology that not only gives him access to the liveness part, but even post liveness, post app verification, but actually transaction password, to use his face, is for the transaction password. So when this person had access to this, so let's say 1 minute ago, to the cell phone, how fast was this person when he also went through the liveness process again? Is it something the same of the previous access that the same device, the same person, the same user is used to doing, or not anymore? So that's all. I would say that it's, once again, the beauty is when you combine this post access with this pre access endpoints. And by the end of this process, you offer a risk score. And this risk score will be your final answer about whether you should approve this transaction, this player, or not. Did I answer to your question, Chris?
Yeah, no, that's very
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah, thank you, Guy. I mean, ultimately, you've got to get to that risk score. You've got to have confidence in that risk score, and as Guy just pointed out, you can incorporate various other signals to contribute to that, and so it's not just a forensic check of images and then you're done. Right, it's a whole process, right, that Guy is describing. You incorporate those other signals, a step-up authentication, perhaps, to again contribute to a risk score that you can really be confident in to make that final judgment. So, yeah, I think that's great. We've got a few minutes to take a few questions from the audience. I just want to throw it open to our panelists to offer any final kind of thoughts before we throw things open to those of you attending to hear your questions. Anybody like to sort of build on any of the previous points, or emphasize a point that's been made so far? We're covered.
I think I'll
We have a
reiterate, right, the
question.
Yeah,
point.
Tom.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll speak quickly there. But yeah, as Guy was saying, Guy was saying around the like the diverse risk signals, right? Like this is important both at the point of onboarding. So yeah, how does someone interact? Like here at Shifty, we're starting to do some kind of cool stuff with ISPs because we have such global reach. Actually, we start to be able to say, if you are in Tokyo Telecom in Japan, you're basically always a friend. But like if you're in some obscure ISP, marine traffic, something something, it often turns out that you're not, this is not good news. But you don't necessarily want to block on that. But as Guy says, you can start to intelligently combine signals, the capabilities we have at Shufti being in-house, we can start to meld and bring those things together. But I think also kind of excitingly, and there are a couple of questions coming in, I think, on this, kind of transition that through to the in life piece. So does the person who came on saying they're a hobbyist trader and they, want to work at weekends, suddenly kind of blowing 20 grand through on cryptocurrency at 2 in the morning, in a way that, yes, you should spot that, but actually businesses don't, right? And that's what we read in the papers every day about, poorly integrated risk controls that drive, you know, um, yeah, high risk or low risk statements here with high risk behaviors that are not then picked up in solutions.
Absolutely. So turning to our questions from attendees, we've got one on blind spots. What blind spots exist in our understanding of customers that deepfakes might exploit? I mean, we've touched on this a little bit, but yeah, are there any other sort of blind spots? And I mean, this could go. I think one way to answer this question would be perhaps to consider a signal like that ISP signal that Tom just mentioned. There may be an underappreciated signal that can contribute. Or that isn't being utilized enough and that fraudsters are exploiting. Is there anything along those lines that jumps to mind?
I'll I'll speak quickly because I want to give other people space, but perhaps just to kind of build on what I just said, like it's that kind of it's joining up that nature and purpose piece. So what has someone said about themselves, and does that play out in the real world? So, when you onboard a customer, you do have you do have blind spots to them, but at least what have they said about themselves, and does that line up with what you observe? Because that can be a real tell if you know yeah, you're seeing common devices or oddities. Well, look, that may be people setting up muling accounts on your systems that are going to cause you trouble later.
Absolutely. Very good. We've got another question here. Is deepfakes a negative sum game that we should be honest about that aspect of we can manage and limit the problem by employing checks, but we are never going to eradicate the problem. So a bit of a almost a cybersecurity philosophy question here. Um, yeah, I mean, from where I'm sitting, that seems like at least a functional way of looking at things, but I'll defer to the experts on that one.
So I'm happy to. So okay, you go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead, Chris. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So I'll talk quickly so you can comment. So I think probably yes. I think anyone who says they're 100% secure almost certainly is not. What we need to do is understand the scope and scale of the problem by employing our checks and making sure that that's done in an intelligent, evolving, ongoing manner. And then we can minimize the impact of these attacks and both what we see today and the legacy side. So keep account of what the webinar is about. And it's really, I'm a test lab. I'm bound to say it should be testing, but evaluating systems, ongoing evaluation systems is fundamentally important to managing and limiting the problem, as Ian says in his question.
And just building on Chris' comments, I mean, yeah, it's a never-ending game. We'll never eradicate the problem. Because every time that we eradicate one type of fraud, a new one will come up. So we exist because of that, actually, right? So yeah, so regardless of the fact how much new technology will create, when I say they, the fraudsters, they are working as hard as we are. So yeah, that's well, how do I say cat and in rat a rat type of game.
Absolutely, absolutely, and just goes to emphasize that point that I think all of our panelists have made today, that it's an ongoing iterative process, not a point in time. So I think that's certainly one of the key takeaways. Shiraz, please, yeah, would want to jump in
Yeah, I
there.
think just to add on that is uh, if we think about like building one general solution that fits everyone's need for defect detection, yeah, that's not going to happen. We have to build things very specific to purpose. Then we can say we are solving some of these. For example, for some specific organization, only detecting the defect of the CEO or the finance person. That's possible. You can build one detector which is real like 99% accurate on one person. That is possible. If you are doing that, then that use case you can satisfy. But going like building it for like 1,000 people with current technology is not possible. So we have to pick our battle with what we want to build. Yeah, based on that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Be specific. That makes good sense. We've got a lot of really good questions here. I think we just have time for one more. But I do want to ask this, I think, an important aspect here to bring in. Um, uh, John asks, it seems to me that every layer of defense added to a customer-facing system increases the likelihood that genuine users are rejected by that system. What is the threshold for genuine user rejection that most organizations are willing to accept?
This question, it's very, sorry, Tom, you want to
No, you
speak?
do. You go. Yeah.
This question is very hard to respond, to be honest, because it depends on how much the company is open for potential threats, how much risk this company is open to deal with. So once again, we just work with high risk companies, and these guys, their appetite is higher compared to, let's say, a traditional type of bank. So probably these banks, their threshold, they are different, way different compared to a gambling operator, right? So there's no specific answer to this question. There's no right or wrong. It all comes down to what type of business are you in?
Yeah, I would. There is one challenge I'd make to that. You're absolutely right, right? It's for businesses to set their own thresholds and targets and determine what's right for them. But actually, there is a subtlety to it. And, to blow Shufti's trumpet for a second, like we have a lot of our own technologies. And I think what we believe that means is that we can combine those risk signals and find the better way through. So kind of at a previous employer, what I saw was where you linearly combine signals, you throw out 2% here, 5% here, 10% here. And so suddenly your best customer who bought 8 of your platform services walks away with a 60% pass rate. And kind of no one's left feeling good at the end of that process. I think what we are, what we can do here is intelligently combine those signals, leverage our kind of in-house ML. So the threshold is for the client to determine, but actually new layers doesn't necessarily have to mean more rejects. It can mean smarter parsing.
Agree.
Very good. Well, that's an optimistic note that seems just perfect to close on. We have several more questions here. I want to really thank everyone who posed questions. We had a really good set of questions here at the end, just not quite enough time to get to all of them. But those questions we will pass along to Shufti. And again, everyone on the call will be receiving that email with a link. You can reach out directly and ask these good questions and get those insights from Shufti and its partners present afterwards. So thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Shiraz. Thank you, Guy, and thank you, Chris. It's been a really interesting discussion today, a problem that I think we're going to be probably revisiting as time goes on because it is not about to go away. So I look forward to continuing that discussion. I look forward to engaging with all of you again and want to thank everyone who posed questions and who listened along today. And please do join us next time when we will tackle another of the ongoing major issues in digital identity and biometrics. So until then, have a good day, stay safe, and have fun.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.